Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to tonight's community meeting. It's Thursday, October 21st. Today, we'll be, as we mentioned, talking a little bit about fire update, but also talking about transitioning from fire suppression to fire recovery. I wanted to start off today with a few introductions. I'm Cynthia Kawasaki-Yee. I'm the Public Affairs Officer for Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. And in the room, we also have a few folks that I wanted to introduce. We have Superintendent Clay Jordan, who will be speaking to us tonight. We also have a few members of our leadership team that I wanted to introduce. They don't normally come to these types of events, and I think they'll be really active in the BEAR process. So it's really important to get them introduced. I'll start off with Ellie Berkey. She's our branch chief of environmental planning and compliance. I wrote these down. We also have Dr. Christy Brigham. She's our Chief of Resources Management and Science. We have Rick Hall, who's brand new to our community and our team. He's joining us from Yosemite, and he's now on the Sequoia and Kings Canyon team. He's our Chief of Facilities, Maintenance, and Construction. We also have Ned Kelleher in the back. He's our Chief Ranger. And in the front, we have Rebecca Patterson. She's on our Public Affairs team here at Sequoia Kings Canyon. In the back, we also have the lead PIO for the new incoming incident management team, Stephanie Bishop. We also have tonight with us Supervisor Larry McCary. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We have Tulare County Fire Chief Charlie Norman and Sergeant Joe Armstrong with Tulare County Sheriff. Thank you everyone for joining us today. So we will go ahead and get started. I'll pass it off to Clay to really go through what the meeting will be.
Okay, just come around here a little bit. So good evening, everybody, and nice to be with you under much improved circumstances. This, I think, is our public meeting number 8. And so this really, in my mind, is about a transition meeting. So our last 7 meetings have been talking about threats of the fire, potential threats to the community, and all that. And the situation has changed. And the first thing that I really want to acknowledge is the cooperative effort of so many agencies, so many firefighters and police officers and emergency services folks wearing different uniforms, the federal level, the state level, the county level, all working together. And so really, I appreciate that, working with our colleagues with Tulare County Sheriff's Department, Fire Department, Office of Emergency Services, CAL FIRE, the State Office of Emergency Services, so many partners that have been working so closely with all the federal agencies, with people who have responded. I think I heard from 42 states of the country has sent people here to help us manage this fire. And so that's huge. And I think that's a good place to begin this evening. We're not out of the fire business yet. So we have our current operations section chief, who Chris St. Pierre, who's going to speak to that, what that status is a little bit. But then we're going to kind of transition then, we're transitioning from fire suppression to fire recovery. And so I guess also in the good news department is that we're not talking about recovery within the communities. We're not talking about rebuilding homes. We're not talking about rebuilding utility systems. We're not talking about, again, because of all the great efforts of so many people working together on this over the last 5 weeks. We have one of the best outcomes that what I could have imagined early on in this situation. However, when you talk about within park boundaries, it is a very different situation. And again, that could have been a whole lot worse. Most of our developed areas are mostly intact, but there is damage that's going to affect our ability to reopen and restore park operations. I understand that there is a lot of interest about that. I understand we have communities that are hurting economically. And so it is very important to all of us as community members, to be able to restore those park operations as quick as we reasonably can. And so we want to talk about that this evening. So after we get a current fire status update, then we're going to switch over and talk about damage assessment. And we brought in a team to help us with that damage assessment on federal lands. We have some Forest Service lands involved, a little bit of BLM land involved, but mostly again on the park. And so it is a team of specialists that will help us assess the damage to our natural resources, to our cultural resources, and to our park infrastructure, to help us to really assess what that is and to help us to begin with a roadmap to recovering those areas. And so Jack from the team, they just arrived yesterday and got settled in today. And so they're already getting their work underway. And Jack's going to walk us through and kind of talk a little bit about that assessment. And it's called a BEAR, our Burned Area Emergency Response Team that helps us do that and works with the park staff on that damage assessment. And then after that, we'll come back to me for my insights as to what that means, kind of interpreting that information as to what that means as far as restoring park operations in the weeks and months ahead. And with that, I think that is kind of what I was envisioning. We have our colleagues from all the agencies to work with us, answer any questions you might have, and we'll certainly have that Q&A opportunity. But again, I thank you for coming and the interest that you have in the recovery processes. And then I envision this is the first of a series of meetings with updates as to that recovery process for those citizens and business owners and whatnot that really have a strong interest in those areas. But it's a transition. So we're starting from fire operations and then to recovery, and then future meetings will focus on the recovery aspects. So with that in mind, I'll turn it back over to Cynthia.
I think we'd like to get started with our fire update. I'll invite up Chris St. Pierre, who's our operations section chief for Team 12.
Thanks for that. Evening, everybody. Normally operations has a map to talk to, but given the intent of this meeting, we're gonna forego that. I've got a few numbers and a few notes just to keep us on track, but got a little brief update here. So acreage for our fire is currently at 88,307 acres, and we're at 60% containment. I'll talk briefly about suppression activities. And so we spent a lot of time over the last several days taking advantage of the weather opportunities that have been positioned in front of us. I'll go over a few brief things that we've been spending a lot of time with, and that's protecting the outwell growth. And so we're really feeling good about that, mitigating the threat to any further fire damage in there. But today and the last several days, we've been running aircraft in there using water dropping helicopters and crews to suppress any fire that's currently advancing into that location. The second one is in the giant forest growth. So today we're using a trail system to ensure that fire doesn't continue to move further to the north in that location. We got an opportunity to fly it today, and really it looks pretty good from the air. It's very steep country where it's continuing to try to back, not very actively, but we were able to successfully get a couple of personnel from a hand crew to anchor in and make sure that doesn't have any further downslope progression. Moving on, another priority for us is the fire at the furthest south end of the fire, and that's below the Mineral King Road. So a lot of opportunity in there. Fire looks very, very good. It still is holding in the creek and looks to be like there shouldn't be any threat of that crossing in the near term future. So transitioning over to the intent of this meeting, and that's trying to restore park operations. Big part of why we're here is to ensure that we start continuing to do the suppression and repair work that has been happening over the last several weeks. And so we've got a couple of priorities over the north and south, and it's such an expansive fire that I'm not going to go over all those. But today we started working around the Hume Lake area and in making sure that we had any of those dozer lines that were around there repaired. And so what that means is we're taking bulldozers and putting water bars in there and ensuring that there's no water runoff that's going to damage the land any further. And then we've got some other excavators, some heavy equipment that are in there to make sure that the berms are pulled over and any piles or any slash that's left over is kind of covered to help that erosion control and make those things disappear, if you will, over the landscape over the next several weeks and months as we go into winter. So big priority for us is to get around that north end and south end. Lots of dozer lines, lots of hand lines that are out there, but we're fairly confident that we're making good progress over the next several days and into the next week coming up. And then the last thing that I'll mention before stepping out is the large amount of hazard tree mitigation that's going on. Currently, we've got a lot of fallers that are working on the General's Highway, and they're going to continue to be working north of where all the switchbacks are, ensuring that road is nice and safe, so that as responders are going up and down, putting out any hot spots and repair efforts are happening, that it's safe for those folks to continue to do those efforts. That's really it for me for an update. Can't tell you how excited we are to be here. It's such a great opportunity to work in this location. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Chris. And I think we'll go ahead and wait for questions at the end so we can keep the meeting going. Next up, we'll invite up Jack Elfke. He is the BEAR team lead, and we'll talk a little bit about the process of BEAR.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Jack Elfke. I'm a recently retired National Park Service career employee, last up in the state of Washington. And by chance, I was down here a year ago for the Castle Fire doing this very same thing. So didn't expect to be back. I'm just going to talk pretty quickly about this process. Clay mentioned the BEAR process, BAER, Burned Area Emergency Response. I'm just going to go through what that is, what we focus on, and ultimately where we hope to end up with that. So just some terminology. You just heard about suppression repair, suppression rehab. That's not what we're up to. The BEAR team is really up to these two in the middle, and I'll explain them in a little bit more detail. But emergency stabilization, you'll hear that term, and the acronyms are ES or BEAR, and then burned area rehab. And I'll explain the differences in a minute. That really is our focus here over these next 2 weeks about that we're going to be there. The longer term restoration, Sequoia restoration, that's not something that the BEAR team will really get into. It's really just those middle two. And then to just explain what it is, you've all been living for whatever it is, 5 or 6 weeks under this emergency situation of a going fire threatening. That emergency doesn't end when the storm comes through or the fire is out. There's ongoing emergency really continues in the post-fire world from storm events and so on. And so that again is what the BEAR team is here to really dig into and try and assess. So for emergency stabilization, or the BEAR part of it, we're really looking at the emergency treatments to minimize threats to human life or property, and to stabilize and prevent unacceptable degradation to critical natural and cultural resources. It's primarily in the park. And so, and not to be overly dramatic, but I mean, this is real life. An example, the Thomas Fire from a few years ago. The fire itself, unfortunately, killed 2 people, but it was the post-fire events that killed 21 people from flooding and debris flows. And again, that's really what our team is looking at, is the things, these post-fire concerns that you're going to be faced with, as well as some of this dramatic, damage to infrastructure and such that can occur following a fire and storm events. The other piece of this that we're looking at, I mentioned the burned area rehab. That's really looking at some of the ecosystem pieces that where areas that might not recover naturally, that may need a boost from some kind of treatments we propose. And then also the infrastructure. Clay mentioned a fair bit of infrastructure that may have been damaged, the trail system, bridges, structures and things like that. We'll take a look at that as well under the separate program. And they're separate programs because they're just separate funding sources that provide funding for it. Again, we are not doing suppression repair, but I wanted to put this up. All those things, necessary things that the fire teams have been doing over these last 5 or 6 weeks, dozer lines, fire lines, all that stuff. They're taking care of that repair. The Bear team is here for these other things I just mentioned. We do get into some of the modeling. We'll undertake that pretty rapidly, actually. I like to show examples from the car fire up in the Reading area from a couple of years ago. So we'll go in and look at the watershed, the burned area, and we'll try and model typical storm events, post-fire storm events, and what that might mean for increased flows downstream. So the river out the door here, for example, we'll model what we think could be happening in the post-fire storm event world, both for stream flows as well as for a potential debris flows. The United States Geological Survey is already working on some preliminary modeling for us, and we'll be able to get some sense of that. This example, all that in red, very high concern for debris flows at Whiskeytown a couple of years ago, and some of those areas indeed did have debris flows. I'm not going to go into the finer detail of this, although I'll gladly speak to you personally if you'd like to afterwards. But there's a whole suite of things we're going to be looking at, these critical natural and cultural resources, infrastructure, and things that we might possibly come up with. You know, the road system, culvert system, very important that stuff gets looked at to be able to deal with potential increased flows, warning signs, hazard tree mitigation. You've heard about that already. There might be some areas that'll need some closure to let the land heal, keep people out for a little while. Trail stabilization, site stabilization, and so on. There's just a number of things that we'll be looking at. We'll be looking, well, I'll go to this slide. This is actually the team. It's actually a very big team, unusually large, although that list up there includes some of the park staff who are helping us. But you can see, and I know that the lettering is small, but there's a small group that's going to look at the watershed, what's going to happen on that landscape with the steep slopes, the landslide potential, debris flow potential, and so on. There'll be a group looking at the cultural resources, so the archaeological sites, historic structures that may have been damaged. A small group to look at vegetation. We especially think of invasive plant species. There are some potential rare plant species, for example, that may have been impacted. They'll look at that. 1 or 2 people looking at wildlife. And some of this reflects what the funding from Bear can be used towards. So some of the groups are larger than others. Facilities, there'll be a few of us looking at the infrastructures I talked about, and so on. And then the forestry crew down there, those are the folks who are going to be looking specifically at the hazard tree situation, following on to the work that the fire team is doing at this moment, as well as oaks, the oak woodlands and sequoias. There's a small group that's going to be focused on that. Well, that's kind of the suite or the gamut of things that we'll be focused on. You know, I will say it is quite a large team. There's 4 different federal agencies represented on this team. There's a tribal person from the state of Washington on this team, and then someone from the Nature Conservancy. So it's quite a spread of folks, all with varying expertise. And so then lastly, just the process we go through quickly. Our mission is to come here. What are the issues that the park is facing from the fire? And what are the values at risk that now are at risk in the post-fire environment from the fire? We'll go out and do our field work. So we will go out and observe. We'll take a lot of, gather a lot of information. We'll bring that back in here. And so that the field work is probably 3 to 5 to 7 days time effort. It's pretty rapid. We certainly can't do everything that probably should be done. We've got a limited time frame. We'll bring that back in here, and then we'll work through the summarizing that and analyzing that information. And then that will ultimately get wrapped into a report, a final report in which we, the BEAR team, will propose to the park potential treatments to mitigate the damage from the fire to park resources and infrastructure. Very quickly, what we're up to. Again, we'll be here about 2 weeks. Then we hand that report off to the park, and it becomes their responsibility to implement from there. So, thank you. I'll be around for questions later if you'd like.
Thank you, Jack. Very informative. I'll go ahead and bring Superintendent Clay Jordan back up to talk about the process for reopening the parks.
All right, thanks so much, Chris and Jack, for that update. So that'll work. All right. So what I thought I'd do is there's been a lot of interest is what has been the damage within the park. And so I thought I'd tell you a little bit of what we know by category, you know, and then Jack's team is really going to drill down and quantify that and help us attach some price tags to some of that, et cetera. But first of all, as far as private property, the losses were limited to one cabin in the Oriole Lake, which, from my understanding, has not seen much use in recent years, and it was, but that was the only loss of a substantial cabin. Also on a neighboring property at Oriole Lake, there was an outbuilding that was lost. That is the extent of the private losses within the communities, and both of them right there. So overall, really good news there, I think. The inventory, we've been talking about hazard trees. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, but we have looks like tens of thousands of hazard trees. These are trees that are either along roads or near structures, or we're not talking about trees in the backcountry. We're not talking about trees that may be a hazard to people hiking, but in the front country, we have large numbers of trees where the fire burned very intensely near our infrastructure. And that's pretty problematic. We have road slopes. Jack was talking about doing the modeling for the hydrology and debris flows. And that's because we have a lot of those steep slopes along sections of the road where the vegetation was burned off and left bare slopes. We know you combine that with rain, snow, precipitation, that causes landslides, that can block roads. Under the worst circumstances, it can even undermine roads and take out sections of the road, which is really a big problem for us, and cause other problems. So we know we're dealing with that. We have a loss of some utility systems, water systems, wastewater systems up around Lodgepole. Grant Grove suffered some damage, not directly from the fire, but from the firefighting activities. Some road damage that we're aware of, probably not anything that is going to put us out of business for very long as we don't lose some sections of the road in the weeks or months ahead, but some damage that we're working with there. Unfortunately, we did lose several historic cabins in the park perhaps the most significant of which was the old superintendent's home out at Redwood Mountain. And that was a total loss that was built, I think, back in 1940, if I understand it. And then we know that the fire burned through 16 giant sequoia groves within the park and a little bit on Forest Service land. And so we don't yet have an assessment as to what we're expecting as far as mortality of giant sequoias. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in that. We think that over the next few weeks, we'll have some preliminary numbers. But, you know, on top of the losses of giant sequoias in the Windy Fire this year on the Sequoia National Monument, and of course, on the heels of the Castle Fire, any loss is tragic. And I'm afraid that there'll be some numbers that will just continue to show the severity of the risk to giant sequoias. But that's going to be a story for another time down the road in the assessment. So those are the categories of what we know was damaged, right? Now, all of those things don't necessarily interfere with reopening the park. And so I want to spend a few minutes talking about that, because that's really the tough question right now. As far the current situation right now up at Giant Forest, Lodge Pole, Wixachi, right now we don't have utilities. The power lines were burned that provided power up to the entire area, and Southern California Edison is working on it, and I don't see that as being a long-term problem for us. I think that that'll be restored within a reasonable amount of time. And then likewise, we had some utility issues up there that will at least take us some weeks to be able to mitigate damage to wastewater systems, water delivery systems or whatnot up there. Not anything that's long-term. The two things that are the bigger questions longer term comes down to hazard trees and the stability of those slopes. And so the hazard trees, our park foresters have been working on this week, trying to get some rough assessments as to what the scale of the problem is. And now they're supported by the Baird team. They'll be supported by other crews from like Yosemite National Park. We're getting all the help we can get to help us with this. But for example, and this is like just hot off the press, just hours old information, that I learned that our initial assessment from the Grant Grove over to the Red Fir maintenance area is as far as they've gotten coming in from that direction. And there is about 10,000 trees, probably more, that are dead hazard trees along that area, along that road corridor. And I'm not talking side roads, I'm just talking about the General's Highway out to that point, a good 10,000 trees. It doesn't mean that all those trees would need to be cleared before reopening. We have to do a risk assessment at a certain point as to, you know, how much risk can the public assume in when they visit a national park. But that is obviously, it is a big concern that we need to learn more about with the help of the Baird team over the next 2 weeks. Coming up the road from Ash Mountain up to, and the area that I've really been focused on first as a really high priority is from Ash Mountain entrance station up the General's Highways to Giant Forest and onto the General Sherman Tree, where that as the first primary corridor. After that, we can talk about going out to Crescent Meadow, Morro Rock. After that, we also have up to Lodgepole or whatnot. In that stretch, we have fewer hazard trees, and an estimate that we're somewhere around 2,000 hazard trees perhaps, because in the lower reaches, we don't have a lot of big trees, obviously in the foothills section. But as you approach Giant Forest, we got some really high severity fire in there that around the junction with the Crystal Cave Road and on that section that took out a lot of trees. And we have a lot of hazard trees in that area. We know we also have a bunch going out towards Crescent Meadow and further up the road towards Lodgepole, but we think we're somewhere in the 2,000 tree range. So if it was just based on hazard trees, it looks like our best access for maybe restoring a route up to Giant Forest, up to Lodgepole would be maybe coming in up the mountain from Ash Mountain. We have a whole lot fewer hazard trees on that approach than coming in from Grant Grove. But the problem then is the second concern, and that is the slopes stability. Obviously, as you're coming up those switchbacks, we have a lot of steep slopes between here and Giant Forest. And that can be what can really put us out of operation for significant amounts of times, especially if it's an ongoing problem where we just keep having debris into the road with freeze and thaw over the winter, obviously precipitation events and that sort of thing. This is where the Bear team is going to be really helpful. And the good news, bad news is we have a rain event, right? A significant storm event coming Sunday, Monday. This atmospheric river, which it tells you we're talking about a bunch of moisture. So you can look at it from three perspectives. From a fire operations, threat of fire, it's really good news. We call that a season-ending event. It means that you have so much moisture that basically it shuts down the fire season until next year. So it looks like if it materializes, and it sure looks like it will, we're going to have a fire season-ending event, and that's good news for that. Number two, we know longer picture drought. We're in severe drought. We desperately need the precipitation. We need the snow. And so that's really good news to have a significant precipitation event early in the winter season. Hopefully that sets a trend, a positive trend in that realm. But from a fire recovery and of restoring park operations, that is certainly not good news, because we have a lot of precipitation coming in a deluge that can really move those slopes. So that's potentially bad news. But we're going to have the opportunity to see from this storm event how our roads fare. And if we find that we'll certainly have some cleanup. We're having low debris flows into the roads already on a recurring basis, some rockfall, but maybe it's not too bad and we find we can clean it up, and that would be an indicator that maybe over the winter months we'll be able to deal with it and maybe shut down the roads during storm events and that sort of things. So it's going to be very telling to see what happens with this. The forecast right now is the latest on it is 3 to 5 inches of rain up high in the upper elevations. And that's for the Tulare County sections of the mountain. So it's higher as you go north towards Grant Grove. We're probably more around the 5 inches. And then on the south end towards Mineral King, down here, probably closer to the 3 inches. That's just the current forecast. The snow level looks like snow coming in at 9,000 feet initially or higher, and then dropping down to about 7,000 feet. So that's getting right about at that mark where we're getting into that lodgepole range as far as the snow. So what happens with the slopes? It's going to be very telling. And fortunately, we'll have the geologists here, we'll have the hydrologists here who can kind of look at the models and see how that translated to what actually happened during the precipitation event. So I think that's going to really help us make some decent projections as to what we can expect over the winter months, in the weeks, months ahead, and maybe even talk about a plan for some sort of time frame for reopening the park. But there's a lot of unknowns at this point, but I wanted you to have the best available current information and about that pathway forward. I think it is fair to say that we're not going to have, other than the Grant Grove and what we have open now, Grant Grove, Cedar Grove, and sections of the backcountry, the most of Sequoia National Park is going to remain closed. Can't imagine it opening in the month of November. After that is highly questionable. I would like to think that when the Bear team does their damage assessment, and we'll have that some information in around 2 weeks from now, we will have also been able to see what the effects of this storm event early next week is. And when we combine those things together, perhaps we can make some better projections as to what reopening the park might look like. You know, perhaps it's something with nighttime closures and some limited daytime access. Any number of things are possible. But I do want you to know that we know this is a big deal, and we know the impacts to the communities. We know that there's just visitors that come from around the world that want to have the opportunities. They have a specific window of opportunity, and it's not necessarily flexible. So we want to be able to restore that experience for people. It is a special experience, and we know it's important to the economy. Obviously, we need to balance those things with what is required of us to protect the park resources and to try to ensure the best recovery and stewardship of the park, and of course the public safety aspects to visitors. But I wanted to begin this dialogue so that you have at least the best information available and how we're going about getting the next stages of that. And with that, I think we're ready to take any questions and answers for any of us, the Bear team, our colleagues from other agencies, and of course for me or other staff in the park.
Okay, we'll go ahead and do Q&A. I think it might be easiest if we focus maybe by area. If we start off with any of the Bear, maybe of the reopening questions first. We'll start with Clay answering any reopening questions, and then we'll go by speaker so we can keep them up for a while. Are there any questions about reopening the parks? And we are live streaming on YouTube and Facebook, so please speak into the microphone.
Clay, the only thing that's open is the South Fork right now in the park, right? The road's just awful. Is there any way we can kind of get that fixed a little bit?
Yeah, and actually, South Fork, have we opened that up yet, Ned? Okay, yeah, we have, and you know, maybe John, it's
Got a lot of iron.
yeah, and it's something, the heavy equipment is probably going to be addressing these landslides and that sort of thing up there.
The worst condition I've ever seen it in.
I've been on it, and not long ago, and I know what you mean, and it is a little bit rough. I'll also say, though, you know, of interest, we've been talking about the General's Highways as far as hazard trees. We also know the Crystal Cave Road, it has probably thousands of trees right there alone. I'm very concerned about the Mineral King Road. I'm very concerned about both hazard trees along that, and also the potential for those debris flows blocking access up to Mineral King. Huge concern for us. And it's not just the General's Highways and the main body of the park, but also access to the Mineral King community and those trailheads up there is something that we're also really focused on.
Any other questions about reopening? Okay. Do we have any questions for Jack or Bear team lead about the Bear process? All right. How about fire update questions? Any fire related questions? Okay. Chris, if we could have you come up to answer fire related questions, please.
As you know, I'm Sheila Stone with the Chamber of Commerce, so I can't focus on one person, so I'll just group everything together. First of all, thank you very much, Superintendent Jordan. We asked you to host this meeting and you came forward and did it for us, and we greatly appreciate you fulfilling that request. I'm not surprised that the room is fairly empty because everyone's feeling comfortable in their own home and watching you on Facebook and YouTube and whatever else. So I expect that future meetings will probably be the same. I wouldn't take them as a letdown at all because people are interested. I've looked at the numbers to see who's watching, and as we do our meetings, the crowd will grow as we get closer to opening or being shut down because of the incoming rain and stuff like that. So people are still going to inquire. So again, thank you to you as the Park Service for putting on the meeting that we asked you to do and fulfilling that request. I did see the other day, and I don't know who posted it. It was on Facebook. It was a very beautiful video of a drive-through of Sequoia National Park, and I was actually hoping that would be seen tonight. Is that on your agenda for this evening?
It was not, but we can pull it up.
Okay. I think that would be really important because I almost missed the video myself. And one of the things that we asked you is that we need to show people why we're closed. Because I believe there was one section where there was a video of the Morro Rock steps, and then there was no building. I'm assuming that's the Morro Rock bathroom. So it's not the one that the general public was. So that's the kind of thing that needs to be clarified. I've worked up there many years, and so I was looking at it going, oh my goodness, the bathroom's gone. So that would be wonderful if you could pull that up for people that are watching tonight. The Chamber of Commerce wants to do a small plug that we are doing a fire relief fund for the businesses in town. The fire relief fund is to keep the money in the town. So anything that's donated to the fire relief fund from wherever you want to donate from, it is a tax deduction, and you can donate to the fire relief fund and the money stays in town. We'll spend the money at the businesses. We'll pass out gift certificates to the locals and the unemployed, keeping everything full circle. So please check out threeriverschamber.org for that information. So we have Three Rivers Bread Basket is assisting us with this effort. So that's a really important thing to know. It's a collaborative effort with the Bread Basket here in town. So if you have any questions, Elizabeth Lamar or myself, Sheila Stone, are people that you can contact, and the website. As for the fire status update, we're only at 60% containment, but we've had 2 rainstorms. So I was surprised to see that we're only at 60%. And I'm wondering why we're only at 60% after two rainstorms. Thank you for your time.
All right. Hey, thanks for that question. I know as the incoming team, with something that started September 11th, you start asking some of those questions as well. Where are we at with containment? And based on what I've seen over the last several days that I've been here, this fire is still has some places where it can move, although they're pretty difficult locations to get to. And I'm sure you guys have probably heard that difficult, steep, inaccessible terrain, right? We like to say that over and over again. And honestly, it's true. We went in with a fresh set of eyes thinking, well, maybe there's some opportunities that haven't been looked at or some different stones that we could overturn. And the fact is we lean pretty hard on our experts, the hotshot crews and the hand crews that are out there, and encourage them to get out to those areas where it is still uncontrolled fire line. So there are some opportunities to add some more containment, and we're still going after that. I would anticipate seeing that in the next 48 to 72 hours with the conjunction of the weather. And I'll let Clay jump in, but I'll finish with, I'm from Southern California and enjoy being here. But one of the things that sometimes we get with some of these predictions is wind. And so we're a little hesitant to add some containment lines where places really haven't grown too much based on the last couple of weather trends that you guys have gotten. Only because we don't want to see a wind direction that would be unfavorable and cause some additional growth where we just called it containment. So I would say definitely coming, really actively engaged in a lot of the stuff that is still uncontrolled fire line, and you'll see some containment additions in the near future.
That's a great summary. Yeah, firefighters do not like to call something contained unless they're feeling really good about that section of the line. So it's a very conservative standard. I think the only other thing I would add to that is if you look at where a lot of that non-contained area is, a lot of it is on the eastern portions of the fire that is getting up into the high altitude rock zones. And so basically the fire, it has no place to go up in that area. So it's been a very low priority to try to contain something that is already contained by a lot of rock and no vegetation. So the efforts have really been focused on the community side of the fire and getting those containments. And it has moved around over the last week. We had a good bit of activity down around Morrill Rock, coming over around to Crescent Meadow. We had some activity around Mineral King and the East Fork that kept the crews pretty occupied with prioritizing the resources. But so 60% sounds like, oh, there's still 40%, and it does demonstrate that, you know, they're can't let off on the gas now, but a lot of that is also on the eastern reaches where that fire is kind of burning out on its own or running into rock and can't find anything left to burn. So that's good news on that situation.
Thank you for the question. So Kings Canyon National Park is open for the most part. You can go up to Grant Grove, you can get to the Grant Tree and the Columbine picnic area. You can go down to Cedar Grove and enjoy that. We have no camping open right now. All of our camping is closed, so there's no overnight stays in those areas. The areas along Generals Highway South is still closed, so that from the Y south through the Generals, all in that burn area is still closed. Does that make sense and answer the question appropriately? So that's the intersection of Generals Highway and Highway 180 in Grant Grove. So everything south of that is closed on Generals Highway, which comes down through the majority of the park and down into Ash Mountain and Three Rivers.
The Delaware North facilities open at this time.
Okay.
No, the Delaware North stuff is still closed. They're looking at standing up some of their operations in Grant Grove, but it's unknown exactly what they're going to be able to do just yet. You have to be self-sufficient, yeah. And so bring a bottle of water, bring a picnic lunch, those sorts of things. And as soon as we can get the facilities back up and running, we will be doing that. Thank you.
Yeah, as far as the potable water at Grant Grove, I think that's going to be resolved in the time frame, maybe even a days. You know, so it's a pretty short-term thing, and then there should be regular bathrooms available. And I think Cedar Grove, is that also boiled? Yeah. So same situation in Cedar Grove. Yeah, once you have a disruption of your potable water, you have to go through a lengthy state-required testing process that takes quite a while to meet those safe water conditions. Any other questions? We can roll this, and I think it's 10 minutes. 3.5 minutes. All right, it's a little less. It's about a little less than 4 minutes. I will offer one editorialize that what you're going to see. You know, we shot the footage on a trip that we made last week up to Giant Forest, and so you'll see where some of the debris has come down. Now, when you look at that, you say, boy, I could get that fixed, you know, run a payloader through there and have it open in an hour. It doesn't look very impressive. The thing that I want to point out is that that has been an ongoing, those rocks coming into the road, the debris flows. So we come through, we clear it, it happens again and again, and that's without precipitation coming down. And so just on its own. So you enter some precipitation into the mix, like what happened Sunday, Monday. The next video we post may look dramatically different than this one, but it does give you a little bit of a sense of, gives you at least a first introduction. And so I think the idea of playing it this evening and maybe ending on that is real good. John, did you have another question?
Yeah, Clay, I was up in Mineral King last Saturday, and boy, it burned so hot. I couldn't get a feel for the Atwell Grove. How hot did it burn in there? Yeah.
You want to go ahead and take that one? Christy Brigham, our Chief of Resource Management and Science.
So the question was, how does Atwell Grove look and what was the fire behavior in that grove? So Tony Caprio, the fire ecologist, has been up there already, and he said that it looks really good, basically like equivalent to a prescribed burn, because most of the fire behavior in there was actually flanking. So it was not a head fire, it was a fire moving sideways across the slope. So we're anticipating beneficial outcomes in that grove.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, it has benefited from past field treatments.
Hang on, Sheila.
That's certainly possible.
To repeat my question, someone has posted that the sign at 180 states that Kings Canyon National Park is still closed.
We could look at that. That's probably might be a sign that the Caltrans maintains. So we will look into that. Thank you for that comment.
If anyone has any more questions about fire, our fire team they have to go to another meeting. So any last questions for the fire team? All right, thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to go ahead and show this video. We do not have sound connected to my computer, so you won't hear any sound, but you will be able to see the video.
No sound, but you get the video. Yeah, where the Sequoia fell near the Fort Guardsman. Yeah, here's your Fort Guardsman, right? That's Theodore Rock, the structure's okay, Giant Forest Museum's okay. Once you get into Giant Forest, the losses are pretty minor. This is by Mora Rock, as it says.
And this is this area downslope that Sheila was mentioning where we lost the historic comfort station. That was an out of service comfort station in that location.
Of course, the Crescent Meadow.
And I believe this is the Morrow Rock Crescent Meadow Road. And where it says just north of Lodgepole, a lot of this was filmed along a utility road up near Redford. So obviously really high intensity fire area. A dirt road, yeah.
And anytime you're up in the park, you ask the firefighters, if you've been up there, you just hear trees coming down. That's how many there are. And it's just always the sound of a tree crashing down in the forest. Some of these roads where we're showing the chainsaw work, they had already been cleared. And these are just new trees that are just constantly coming down.
And for those of you online, you can see the video. It was posted to our social media channel. So if you're on Facebook, that video can be found there. And if you're on YouTube, it's also posted on our Sequoia Kings Canyon YouTube channel. All right. Any other questions for the team? You're not. But I can.
Check to see if we have any other questions online.
I'm not gonna ruin any last names, so I'm just say a gentleman by the name of David is confirming that December will be the earliest the Ash Mountain entrance station will be opened at the earliest.
Question was, is December going to be the earliest that Ash Mountain entrance station could be open? And the response was, yes, we think so.
Question that hasn't been answered is there any potential to open at the Y to get to Montecito area?
Yeah, I honestly don't know. That's something we can look at over the next couple of weeks. That is where we had a huge concentration of the 9 or 10,000 hazard trees are in that section from the Y over to that area. And that's something we'd be coordinating with the Forest Service on as well. So I'm not sure about that, but probably not in the next few weeks in any event.
That's not really answered, but I don't know if you can answer this, is that they're asking for Jack's slides to be added to the video somehow, because I guess they couldn't see him very well. Other than that, it appears we've answered all their questions.
Yeah, I think we'll find a way to post those.
right, if there are no other questions, we can go ahead and conclude this meeting. Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. Thank you for those online for joining us. We hope to have another one of these meetings in the next couple weeks once we do get that report back, and we'll be inviting you all back to join us then. Thank you.